Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome back to a new video. My name is Maneetpaul. In today's video, I'll be showing you exactly how to start a podcast for your personal brand. If you've been following me outside of YouTube, you know that I recently launched my podcast called the Sikh Influence. It's a weekly podcast where I interview Sikhs from around the world who are doing what they love. What I didn't realize though is how big of an impact launching a podcast was going to have on my personal brand. Having a podcast allows you to reach an entirely new audience. And for me personally, it has also been a great way for me to incorporate Sikhi into my weekly content. I'm going to divide this video into two different sections. The first part will be all about how to launch a podcast and how to start. And then after that, we'll talk about some of the technical requirements for launching a podcast. So with that being said, if you're interested in learning how to start a podcast and how to expand your personal brand, keep on watching. So jumping right into it, I want to start by talking about all the little pieces of advice that really helped me when launching my podcast. The reality is most people don't make it past their first 10 episodes when launching a podcast. So if you're being serious about launching one, here are some things I recommend doing. The first piece of advice I have is don't spend too much time on time wasters, especially things like choosing your name and designing your podcast artwork. When I started my podcast, The Sikh Influence, I knew it was basically like launching a sub-brand underneath my personal brand, and I needed to have the self-awareness not to spend too much time on all the small details that are involved with doing that. Another thing very similar to choosing a name is designing your logo for your podcast, and I knew this could have been something that could have taken up way too much time if I wasn't careful. So what I ended up doing was just making the logo myself and just stuck with it the whole way through. And one thing I also recommend doing is if you're starting a podcast, record your first couple episodes before you make your logo. Making a logo is a great way to procrastinate and it can suck you in, but what really matters is actually getting your content made. So make your podcast episodes first, and once you're ready to launch, then go back and make the logo for it. The next piece of advice I have is start small. When I was first thinking of my podcast and the idea behind it, I had this whole vision of reaching out to people with large followings who are somewhat famous and could be good guests for my podcast. What I quickly realized though was I was going way too far ahead and I had no experience when it came to producing podcast interviews or anything like that. So instead, what I made the decision to do was interview my close friends and family. And this was the best thing I decided because the guests that I chose for the first few episodes were absolutely amazing and they went perfectly with what I had in mind for the podcast. And also because of that, since these people were my friends and family, I was able to get very good constructive criticism that helped me improve for the next interviews. And that would not have been something I could have gotten had they have been random strangers that I was meeting for the first time to have an interview with. And the last piece of advice I have for starting your podcast, but also for anything else like a YouTube channel, a blog, an Instagram profile, whatever it may be, is value consistency over everything else. The majority of personal brands that get started don't last because the people who are running them aren't being consistent. Whether it's a YouTube channel, a blog, a podcast, it doesn't matter which platform you're on. The key to having a successful personal brand is being very consistent and frequent with your content. And let me illustrate this for you. When I launched my podcast, I made the choice to wait an entire month before launching my first episode. And that actually allowed me to create a 3 to 4 episode buffer before even publishing my first episode. I knew that in order for this project to be successful, I had to be very, very consistent. And I had to make sure that launch that I had carried that momentum through to the following weeks. And the only way to do that is to be consistent with your content. And that's why I made a backlog and a buffer before even launching my first episode. Had I just published my first episode as soon as I had it ready to go, I probably would have fallen behind on my content schedule and there would have been a gap somewhere in this first month that I'm currently in right now. And I wanted to take this unique opportunity to make a buffer before even releasing so I didn't have to do that. Another way you can stay consistent is by holding yourself accountable. Say you want to release content every single week, take that one step farther and pick a day of the week and use that as your deadline. Regardless of if your content is fully polished or ready by that deadline, make it a point to press the publish button regardless of what condition your content is in on that date. Yes, if the date comes and you press publish and your content isn't fully polished yet, you may be a little bit frustrated putting work out there that isn't the best it could have been. But if you've been following my other videos, you know that learning in public is the best way to grow your channel. And learning in public means putting work out there that you learned from. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to learn from them. Every time you go through this process, you'll learn something something new, and your next piece of content will be that much better. So to recap here, if you focus on the important stuff, if you start small and you stay consistent, you are almost guaranteed to be successful. All right, moving on. The next thing I want to talk about are the technical requirements needed for starting a podcast. Now, before talking about this section of the video, I want to emphasize the fact that you could technically start a podcast with nothing but your phone. And yes, there are a few things I recommend investing in that would really help make your podcast better, but never let the technical stuff get in the way of putting your work out there. Just start with something and you could always figure the technical stuff out as you go. The first technical thing I want to talk about is your microphone. I strongly want to recommend getting a high quality mic. And if you're interested to know what I use, I have a Blue Yeti microphone right over here. And I have it on this boom arm that's attached to my desk, and it's been really easy to move around and, shape it up like this. So I want to recommend that. If you're interested in this specific setup that I have, I'll leave a link in the description below. The next thing you'll need is an audio editing software of some sort. I recommend Audacity. It's a free software. There are a bunch of free tutorials on YouTube that will teach you how to use it and make podcasts with it. You could also use video editing softwares like iMovie or Adobe Premiere, and that's what I've been using, honestly, because I'm just so familiar with it. But they also work great for audio editing. All you need is something very basic for trimming, cutting, and volume adjustments. Now, if you don't want to edit your own podcast, because it does get very overwhelming very quickly, having the levels adjusted, cleaning up the background noise, things like that, it's a whole different world, especially compared to video editing. If you don't want to do that, I recommend using services like Fiverr or Upwork, and I've been using Fiverr for my last couple episodes of the podcast, and it's been a huge time saver. So don't be afraid to invest in outsourcing some of the work. The last technical thing that you definitely will need at some point is a way to distribute your podcast to all the different websites and services people use to listen to podcasts. I personally use a service called Buzzsprout, and it's been absolutely great to work with. It's just a website that lets you upload your podcast to one place, and it will create something called an RSS feed for your podcast. Once you have that RSS feed, all you have to do is go into Buzzsprout and click on the links to connect your RSS feed to things like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, all these other services, and they will pick up your feed and automatically grab all your podcast info and episodes and bring them into their own platform. So you don't have to upload your episodes to each individual website. It all goes through Buzzsprout, and then they distribute it through a feed to all these other websites. If you're interested in using Buzzsprout, I actually have a special referral link for you in the description below. If you sign up and purchase it for 2 months, you'll get a $20 Amazon gift card, so check that out. So to recap the tech requirements, I want to recommend getting a high quality microphone like the Blue Yeti, also learning how to audio edit using programs like Audacity or outsourcing it to Fiverr or Upwork, and then lastly, using a service like Buzzsprout to distribute your podcast to all the different platforms that are out there. However, above all, focus on your content. The technical stuff will always figure itself out over time. What you want to focus on the most is your content. So do what you love and enjoy the work that you do with this new podcast that you're working on. So that's all the advice I currently have for launching a podcast. If you're interested in hearing the podcast I just launched, check it out on the sikhinfluence.com. I'll leave a link for that down below as well. If you have any other questions about launching a podcast, anything more specific that I didn't talk about in this video, please leave a comment down below. I'll be more than happy to help you out, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you are starting a podcast, please let me know. I promise I will check it out. I love listening to new podcasts. So thank you so much for watching. I'll see you guys next time. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.